How you doing, everyone? Welcome back. Good to be back outside again. It's been a little while. We've either been recording at night or the weather hasn't cooperated, or often both. So anyway, what are we talking about today? Well, as you know, there are a lot of people out there who like to mispronounce the vice president's first name, and I've brought this up before. They don't call her Kamala Harris. They call her Kamala Harris. And I got thinking about that. And really, I was kind of thinking about it anyway. But then I heard a commentator say something about it. And it really kind of got me thinking that I'm right. Back in the 1980s, when I was a young boy who loved professional wrestling, there was a guy known as the Ugandan Giant, also known as Kamala. Now, the wrestler Kamala, like I said, the Ugandan Giant, he was big and brutish, and, you're supposed to be terrified of this guy. He was a simple-minded individual, not very smart, because, he's from the deep, dark jungles of Africa, right? And that's where they build him from, as being from the jungles of Africa, right? He wrestled barefoot. He wore a loincloth. He had the war paint. He had his face all painted up. In fact, just look for images of Kamala, the wrestler. And yes, it is spelled the same as the vice president's first name. Kamala, the wrestler. But he wore the war paint. He had, on his way to the ring, he would wear this big African mask, and he would carry a spear and a shield, and he just looked like some tribal, what I guess we would refer to as savages. I don't really like using that word as it pertains to human beings generally. I mean, unless you truly are a savage, which some people from advanced societies are savages, but that's beside the point. But if you think about it, Donald Trump, he more often than anybody else will refer to her as Kamala. Now keep in mind, I guess it's the WWE now, but last time I watched professional wrestling, it was known as the WWF. Well, the WWF, as it was known then, Donald Trump was associated with them. Just putting my notes aside so they don't blow in the breeze here. I'm finished with that part anyway. So the WWF, back in the day, run by Vince McMahon, right? Donald Trump was associated with them, so he knows professional wrestling and professional wrestlers. Okay? So, it's not by accident that he refers to Kamala refers to Kamala. Now I'm getting confused here. It's not by accident that he refers to Kamala as Kamala, and they're spelled the same way. Now Kamala is actually a fairly common Indian name, apparently. I don't know much about Indian culture, admittedly, but by everything I've been able to find, it's a fairly common Indian name. Whereas Kamala is a racist trope of a professional wrestler. He was all the stereotypes of being from Africa. He was allegedly discovered on an African exhibition. That's part of the backstory. He had a handler who wore safari clothes. Again, it's all part of the backstory. It's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, now, ironically, the wrestler, like the man who played the part of Kamala, ironically enough, his last name is Harris. Man's name was James Harris. He actually died here about 4 years ago. Excuse me. But yeah, he died about 4 years ago between diabetes and COVID, and there was something else that was in. He had a few, cardiac arrest, I believe. Yeah, it was cardiac arrest that killed him, but he had the comorbidities of COVID and diabetes. But yeah, I mean, he's just a racist trope of a wrestler. Something that, I don't know, maybe they could get away with it today, maybe not. I don't know. I would hope not. And I don't know that it was necessarily intended as racist at the time. But then again, there are a lot of things that we look back on now that we wonder, how did we ever allow that? How did that ever get by? I mean, that's just disgusting, And, I mean, it is what it is, I mean, but I remember seeing Kamala in the ring when I was a kid. I haven't watched wrestling since, I don't know, probably the early 90s, when I was a teenager. So, I can tell you some of the names that have come and gone, but this isn't about that now, is it? Ironically, though, like I said, his name was James Harris, and Kamala Harris, no relation. Kamala Harris, her name is fairly common as far as Indian names go, from what I've been able to find. So, is it a racist thing to call her Kamala? I think, for some people, yes, it absolutely is. I don't think that everyone who calls her Kamala is being deliberately racist. I think some of them legitimately don't know that her name is Kamala, and the reason they don't know that is because of their sources of news, and people give them so many different pronunciations. So it may not be deliberate racism on their part, but it is. It is a racist trope to, and it's also a bit dehumanizing to deliberately mispronounce someone's name. Why would you do that? Why would you deliberately mispronounce someone's name when you know what her name is? I mean, let's take, for example, Donald Trump, right? Nobody calls him Donald Trump. I mean, it looks like it could be Donald, but it's obviously not. Why? Because we know that name. It's a fairly common name in the English language. So, what's the point of mispronouncing her name? Simple. First of all, it's part racism, and it's also part you're insignificant, you don't matter, you're not important. don't need to know your name, don't need to pronounce it right. And, for Trump to say that there's, all these different ways to say it, and sometimes he'll say it correctly, and then he'll correct his correct pronunciation and say it incorrectly. But what do you expect from a disgusting person like that who is never really been a good guy in any sense of the word? Anyway, we'll see you next time.